I have torn down and rebuilt more than 4,000 clocks in my life. Mantel clocks, railroad pocket watches, a courthouse tower movement that had stood frozen since the Eisenhower years, the tall walnut grandfather clock my own father carried home the autumn I was born. Give me a mechanism of 200 parts, and I could find the one tired gear, the single worn pivot, and tell you almost to the week when it would quit on you. 46 years of that. I never once thought to run the same diagnostic on the three people I raised. This is Dad's harsh revenge. Settle in, because I'm going to take my time with this one the way I take my time with everything. Tell me down in the comments where you're listening from tonight. Hit that subscribe button. Leave a like if a thing I say lands true. It costs you nothing, and it tells me somebody's out there. My name is Frank Mercer. I'm 71 years old, and I kept a watch and clock repair shop on Linden Street, in a small river town in western Pennsylvania, for 46 years before I locked the door for the last time. I know what it means when a thing keeps honest time. A clock doesn't flatter you, it doesn't perform. It sits on the shelf and tells you exactly how much of your life has gone by, whether you want to hear it or not. I spent my whole career around that kind of honesty. I suppose I assumed some of it had rubbed off on the people in my own house. My wife passed 6 years ago, Margaret, 41 years married. She was the warm one, the one who softened my edges, the one the kids called first. After she was gone, the calls got shorter, and then they got further apart, and I told myself that was natural, that grown children have lives, that I'd raised them to be independent, and I had no business complaining about getting exactly what I aimed for. I believed that right up until the heart business started. It was my cardiologist who found it, a routine stress test that I failed in a way that put a real seriousness in his face. 3 vessels badly blocked, one of them 90%. He used the word widowmaker, and then apologized for using it. They scheduled me for a quadruple bypass, open heart surgery. They crack you open like a walnut and stop your heart and run your blood through a machine while a man sews new road around the dead ends in your chest. At 71, the surgeon, Dr. Halverson, a calm woman with reading glasses pushed up into her hair, told me the procedure was very standard now, very routine. People always say routine when it isn't their own chest on the table. I told my children 6 weeks out. 6 weeks. I want you to sit with that number, because I sat with it for a long time afterward. Not 6 hours, not 6 days. 6 full weeks, 42 days, in which any one of the 3 of them could have circled a square on a calendar, found a sitter, asked a boss for a day, and driven the highway down to sit beside their father while a surgeon stopped his heart. I'm going to tell you exactly what each of them did with those 42 days, because I wrote it all down later, the way I used to log every repair that came across my bench. My oldest is Bruce, 54, lives 2 hours off in the Cleveland suburbs, does something in commercial real estate that he's explained to me 4 times, and that I've never once retained. He called me on a Sunday night. I could hear a ball game behind him, and the particular distracted quality in his voice that meant his eyes were on a screen. He said, "Dad, don't you worry about a thing, we've got you covered, all 3 of us." And then, in the same breath, smooth as a man who's done it 100 times, he asked whether I'd had the house on Linden Street appraised lately, just out of curiosity, the market being what it was, just making conversation. My boy could pivot from open heart surgery to comparable sales in under a sentence. I'll give him that. It's a kind of talent. My daughter is Renee, 50, the middle one, the one who's always sorry. She sent me a long text and then a longer voice memo, 4.5 minutes of it. I played it twice. Not because it moved me, but because I kept waiting for the part where she said when. She was so sorry about the timing. Work was a nightmare right now. Her husband had a thing. The kids had things. She would absolutely, 100%, figure it out and be there for me. "Dad, you know I will." She said, "Of course," so many times it stopped meaning anything, the way a word does when you say it too many times in a row. There was a lot of feeling in that message. There was not one single concrete plan. And then there's my youngest, Travis, 37, and I held on to being his father a little harder than I held on to the other 2, because he's the one who's struggled, and a parent loves the struggling one with a different muscle. Travis called me on a Thursday, 3 weeks before the surgery, and for about 90 seconds it was the call I'd been hoping for. He asked how I was feeling. He asked if I was scared. I told him the truth that I was. He went quiet in a way that I let myself believe was tenderness. Then he said he hated to even bring it up at a time like this, but he was in a tight spot, behind on his truck payment, and they were threatening to come take it, and without the truck he couldn't get to work, And could I float him $2,000 just till he got square? He's 37 years old. I said yes, because I have always said yes to that boy. I moved the money from my phone while he was still talking. He said, "You're a lifesaver, Dad. Get some rest." And that was the last I heard from him before they wheeled me back. I want to stop here and tell you about the morning of the surgery, because I've never told anybody this part, and I think it matters. They had me report at 5:30. I woke up at 4 in my own house, the house Margaret and I bought in 1981, and I sat at the kitchen table in the dark with a glass of water I was allowed to have, and a long list of things I wasn't. The house has a particular silence to it when you live alone. It isn't peaceful. It's the silence of a place that's listening back. I sat there and I thought, plainly, the way you think a thing when there's no one to perform for. If my heart doesn't start back up on that table today, the last real conversation I had with my youngest son was him asking me for money. I turned that over for a while. Then I called the ride share, and a young fellow named Jordan drove me to the hospital in the dark and asked if I was nervous, and I said a little, and he said his grandfather had the same surgery and was out chopping wood within the year. And I have thought about that kindness from a stranger more than I've thought about almost anything my own blood said to me that month. They kept me 12 days. I'd been told 3, maybe 4. My heart didn't want to settle after they restarted it, through a rhythm called atrial fibrillation, and then the incision down my chest got angry and red, and they got worried about infection, and put me on IV antibiotics, and watched me like a pot they didn't trust to boil. Then there was the question of where I'd go after, because the social worker, a sharp and kind woman, kept asking who would be at home with me, and I kept not having a good answer, and that alone bought me extra days while they decided whether they could send a man my age home to an empty house. Let me tell you something about recovering from having your chest opened. There is a pain that comes in the night and introduces itself like a stranger who's decided to move in. There is the indignity of needing a nurse to help you sit up, to help you to the bathroom, to hold a heart-shaped pillow against your sternum so you can cough without feeling like you'll come apart at the seam. And there is a specific kind of loneliness that exists nowhere on earth except a hospital room. It isn't the loneliness of being by yourself, which I'd made my peace with years ago. It's the loneliness of being surrounded by the soft machinery of other people's families, the visitors filing past your open door with balloons and grocery store flowers, and turning your head to the chair beside your own bed and finding it empty, day after day after day. I memorized that chair. Brown vinyl, a tear in the armrest patched with tape that didn't quite match, one leg shorter than the others so it rocked if you sat down too quick. I knew that chair the way you know a scar. Bruce called twice in 12 days, day 2 and day 6. Day 2 he asked how I was holding up. Day 6 he asked, very gently, whether I had all my financial paperwork in one place, because it might be smart to get organized, Dad. At my age, no rush, just thinking ahead. I told him my paperwork has been in order since before he could read. I'm a clockmaker. Every part I've ever owned lives in a labeled drawer. I don't lose things. Renee called nearly every day, and I'll grant that it sounds devoted until you understand that each call ran about 4 minutes and was mostly a recitation of the reasons she hadn't come yet and the promises about when she would. The reasons were inventive, I'll give her that. A migraine, the dog at the vet, a water heater that picked that exact week to die, a parent-teacher thing she couldn't move. On day 7, she swore she'd be there day 9. On day 9, my phone buzzed at noon with a text. Dad, I'm so sorry, something came up, I'll explain everything, I love you. I read it. I set the phone face down on the rolling table. I looked at that brown vinyl chair, and I felt something move in me, not loud, not with tears, just a quiet structural shift, the way an old beam finally gives up a fraction of an inch after carrying weight for 40 years. Permanent. You can't unshift it. Travis didn't call once after the money left my account. Not once. On day 7, a night nurse named Teresa came in around 2 in the morning to check the lines, a heavy-set woman with tired, kind eyes who'd clearly seen every version of human nature this world makes. She found me awake, looking at the ceiling. She glanced at that empty chair, then at me, and she asked very softly, Mr. Mercer, you got any family? I said yes. I even smiled when I said it. She nodded slow, the way people nod when they've understood the thing you didn't say, and she straightened my blanket and squeezed my hand once, just once, and told me to push the call button anytime, day or night, she'd come. I have thought about that hand more than I can tell you. On day 12, Dr. Halverson pronounced me well enough, signed the papers, And the social worker asked one more time, with real concern, whether someone was picking me up. I told her my ride was arranged. I called a ride share from the curb in a wheelchair the hospital made me ride, policy, and a young woman named drove me the 25 minutes home and helped carry my little white bag of pills to the porch. I stood at my own front door a minute before I went in. I don't fully know why. My chest ached, and I had a folder of instructions and a list of follow-ups, and there was no earthly reason to stand on my own porch, like a man waiting to be let into someone else's house. But I stood there and looked at the door I'd hung myself in 1983, the brass knob I'd replaced twice, the little split in the bottom panel I always meant to fill and never did. I went in, and here is the thing I want you to understand. The house was exactly as I'd left it 12 days before. That sounds like nothing. It is not nothing. When you live alone and you're gone 12 days and you come home and the house is exactly, precisely as you left it, it means no one came. Nobody brought in the mail piling under the slot. Nobody watered Margaret's African violet on the kitchen sill, which had gone brown and crisp waiting. Nobody opened a window or moved a cup or stood for 1 minute in the space where their father lived. No one came. I set my bag down. I filled the kettle out of habit, even though I wasn't supposed to have much caffeine, and I stood at the kitchen window looking out at the backyard, the maple I planted when Bruce was born, the wooden bench I built the summer Margaret got sick, and I thought about that brown vinyl chair rocking on its short leg in a room I'd never see again, waiting for somebody who never showed. I thought about Teresa asking if I had family and the smile that had cost me something I still can't name. I thought about my youngest boy's voice. "You're a lifesaver, Dad," and the silence after the money landed. Then I did what I've done my whole life when a mechanism comes to me broken. I didn't react. Reacting is the slammed door, the shouted thing you can't pull back. I diagnosed. I sat in my chair by the window, the one with the worn right arm where my elbows lived for 30 years, and I let the afternoon light come in low and gold the way it does in October, and I worked the problem cold. When I had it, I picked up the phone. Not to call Bruce, not Renee, not Travis. I called Ed Brunner, my attorney of 30 years, a slow and exact man I've always respected for being slow and exact in a world that is neither. He listened to me for 15 minutes without once interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet a beat, and then he asked, "Frank, are you sure about this?" I told him I'd been sure since day 7. He said he'd draw it up. "If you've stayed with me this long, do me the one small kindness of subscribing. Plenty of folks watch all the way through and never do it, and it's free, and it tells an old man his story was worth the time. Hit the like button too, and tell me in the comments whether you'd have done what I did. I genuinely want to know. Now, let me explain something about the trait I gave my life to, because it's the whole of how I think. A clock doesn't get fixed by force. You can't be angry at a mainspring. You can't argue a gear into doing its job. What you do is you slow down, you take it apart, you find the one part that's failed the others, and you decide, deliberately, what the mechanism is going to do next. You wind it, you set it, and then you let it run. The work that matters is invisible. It's the patience before the patience. Nobody admires a clock for keeping good time. They only notice when it stops. So I built something. 6 weeks after I came home, when I was strong enough to be on my feet in my own kitchen, I called all 3 of my children and invited them to Sunday dinner. I want to be precise about why, because I think precision is the only honest thing a man my age has left. I was not setting a trap, exactly. I was not putting on a show of weakness. I was doing something more basic than either. I was going to let them stand in front of me and show me who they were, and I was going to remember it. I made Margaret's pot roast, the real one, the one that takes all day, and I made her cornbread from the recipe card in her own hand that lives in a tin on the counter. I set the good table, the one we used at Thanksgiving. I put a Hank Williams record on low. By every visible measure, I was a warm old man delighted his family had finally come around. Bruce arrived first, the way he always arrives first, because arriving first is itself a statement about what kind of man he wants you to think he is. He came in with a bottle of wine that probably cost $40 and gave me a hug that lasted a beat longer than any hug he's given me since he was a boy. And then his eyes went to work. I watched them go. The crown molding I cut and hung myself in '87. The built-in shelves. The new water heater. Into the kitchen, the counters, the appliances, back out to the front room, a full professional appraisal wearing the costume of a son's warm smile. "Place looks great, Dad," he said. "Same as it's always been," I said. "I know, it looks great." Rennie came in right on time with a store-bought apple pie held out in front of her like a peace offering she already knew was too small. She hugged me a long time, and I could feel the relief in it, the relief of finding me upright and walking and not owing her a deathbed. Then she sat down and, with the careful architecture of a woman who's been rehearsing for 6 weeks, she began to explain the hospital, the migraine, her husband's schedule, the water heater, the kids. She said I felt awful about it 3 separate times, and I've noticed that people who feel awful about a thing usually move heaven and earth to avoid doing it. I listened to every word the way I've listened to 46 years of customers explaining how the clock got broken, which is to say I took in the information without reacting to it, filed it accurately, and kept my conclusions to myself. I told her I understood completely. She let out a breath she'd been holding for 6 weeks. I passed her the cornbread. Travis came last, 40 minutes after I said, wearing the same look he's worn since he was 15, a kind of preemptive boredom, like life is a waiting room, and there's surely somewhere better he ought to be. He didn't mention the hospital. He didn't mention the $2,000. He kissed the top of my head, sat down, picked up his fork, and asked what was in the roast. He checked his phone twice before the plates were half empty. I watched all three of them. The way Bruce kept drifting to the shelves and the molding. The way Renee laughed a little too fast and a little too hard at everything I said. The way Travis ate with the easy contentment of a man who had no idea he was auditioning for anything. And when the moment was right, I set my fork down. I've been meaning to mention, I said. Since the surgery, it got me thinking about things. The table changed. Just slightly. A shift in 3 sets of shoulders, a narrowing of attention. But I'm a man who spent his life feeling for the smallest movement in a still mechanism, and I felt all three of them lean in. At my age, I said, it doesn't hurt to get your affairs in order. I've been working with Ed on it, just making sure everything's where it ought to be when the time comes. Bruce said very carefully, that's smart, Dad. That's really responsible. Renee said, of course it is, you should. I picked up my fork and said, anybody want more roast? What happened over the months after that unfolded with the slow certainty of a thing that's been engineered right. Bruce started calling every Sunday at 10 on the dot. Not 5 of, not 10 after. 10. He asked about my heart, my sleep, my walks, my appetite, and after 15 minutes of devoted son performance he would find his way, smooth as ever, to some practical question about the house. Had I looked into a reverse mortgage? Was I keeping current on the property taxes? Had I thought about putting the place in a trust for simplicity for the family? Just thinking ahead, Dad. Just being practical. Renee started showing up on Thursdays with real groceries. Not gas station flowers and a sympathy card, but the coffee I drink, the rye bread I like, the brand of soup Margaret used to buy. She was warm and easy and genuinely good company, and sitting across my kitchen table from her on those Thursday afternoons, I felt a thing I hadn't braced for. Grief. Not for what was happening now, but for what could have been happening all along. Grief for the version of my daughter who might have shown up on day 3 or day 6 or any single one of those 12 days and sat in that brown vinyl chair and just been there. That daughter was real. She was sitting in my kitchen now with the right coffee in her mother's hands, and she'd been reachable the whole time. She just hadn't come until there was something in it. Travis even started texting. Short ones, half-spelled, but texts. Hey Pop, you good? Cold out, drive safe. Once, with no words at all, a photo of a sunset, which I took to be his version of poetry. And here's the part the comments always want to fight me about, so let me get to it. There are grandchildren in this. Bruce has 2 boys I barely know. Travis has a daughter he doesn't see enough. And Renee has a girl named Lily, 12 years old. And Lily is the one who got it right when not one adult did. While I was in that hospital, Lily mailed me a card. An actual card, in the actual mail, a kid's drawing of a heart with a Band-Aid on it and crooked letters that said, "Get better, Grandpa, I love you." She found a stamp and an envelope and my address, which means she had to ask somebody for all 3, and somebody helped her, probably without thinking about it. And that card sat propped on my hospital tray for 5 days, and was the only thing in that room that came from my own blood. I kept it. I have it still. So when people ask me, what about the grandchildren, here's my answer. I did not punish a 12-year-old for what her mother and her uncles did. The children didn't choose their parents, and they didn't choose to be left out of a hospital room. I'll tell you in a minute exactly what I did about that. Because the consequence was already written. Ed had the papers. I'd signed them weeks before I cooked that first pot roast. It's a Saturday now, early spring, and I'm sitting on my front porch on Linden Street with a cup of decaf I've made my peace with, and the kind of quiet satisfaction that belongs to a man whose affairs are very much in order. The redbud in the yard is making up its mind to bloom. A neighbor kid is failing to start a lawnmower 2 houses down. My chest is healed. I walk 2 miles every morning, which is more than I walked before they cut me open, so I suppose the whole business did me some mechanical good, even as it showed me certain weaknesses I'd been too polite to look at. Last month I made a donation to the hospital, a fund for patient comfort, the kind of money that buys better chairs and warm blankets and an extra hour of somebody to sit with the people who wait alone. I made it in Teresa's name, the night nurse who squeezed my hand. I didn't tell her. I didn't need to. And the will that used to split 3 ways among my children now reads differently. There's a veterans organization, men and women who held things together when nobody came for them either. There's a scholarship at the community college for kids learning a real trade, because I believe a young person with a skill in their hands is the most durable thing you can build, and the trades are dying and somebody ought to fund them. There's a children's hospital, and there is one thing that goes to family after all. A 5 and 29 college account, fully funded, in the name of Lily, my granddaughter, the only Mercer who put a stamp on an envelope and mailed her grandfather a heart with a band-aid on it when he was alone and afraid. Her mother doesn't know. Lily doesn't know. It will be there when she's 18, and it will be enough. The house on Linden Street, the molding I cut myself, the maple I planted, the bench I built the summer I started losing Margaret, all of it goes to the estate, to be sold and divided among those charities. Ed knows. Ed has known since October. There's one more thing in the file. A letter, 1 page, written by hand in my own small careful print, addressed to Bruce and Renee and Travis, to be opened after. I'll tell you what it says. It says, by the time you read this you'll have questions, and I want to answer the one that matters, because I spent my life around honest machines and I believe in honest information. I had open heart surgery. They kept me 12 days. I told you 6 weeks ahead of time. I came home alone in a car I ordered from my phone. I'm not writing this in anger. I'm writing it because you deserve to know the exact reason behind every line of this document, the way I'd want to know the exact reason a clock stopped. The house was built well. I kept it up. I hope it does some good now. I loved you. That part never once changed. Your father, Frank Mercer. Renee comes by this morning around 11 with a coffee cake, wearing the blue cardigan she knows I like, and she calls Dad from the gate, even though she can plainly see me on the porch, a habit she's had since she was 7 that I've always loved and never told her I loved. She sits in the other chair. We talk about Lily's science fair and the price of beef and whether it'll be warm enough soon to put tomatoes in. She's good company. She always was when she came. I look at her over the rim of my cup, 50 years old, her mother's hands laughing in the right places, and she is, sitting here in the spring light in her blue cardigan, genuinely easy to love. And I do love her. That isn't complicated. You can love your child and still change your will. You can love your child completely and still let a consequence be a consequence. You can love somebody all the way down and still refuse, in your own heart, to pretend that 12 days of an empty chair were anything other than what they were. She doesn't know. She thinks she's drinking coffee with a grateful old man whose good opinion she's slowly earning back, whose house and accounts she's carefully, warmly inheriting, one Thursday's groceries at a time. She thinks the Sunday calls and the right coffee have been working, and in the ways that are still available to us, the human ways, the father and daughter ways, they have. They gave me back a version of my children I'd stopped believing was real. I'm grateful for that. The paperwork just doesn't know about the blue cardigan. Bruce calls at 10 the next morning, on the dot, and we talk for 18 minutes, my heart, my sleep, my walks, and then right on schedule, reliable as a wound spring, he mentions that a house 3 streets over just sold for a number that surprised him. Just interesting. Just keeping an eye on the market for me, Dad. Anyway, he says, I just want you to know we're all here for you, whatever you need. I look out at the redbud, which has finally made its decision and started to bloom, right on time, whether anybody asked it to or not. I know you are, Bruce, I tell him. I know. And Travis. My youngest calls on a Tuesday, which never happens, and asks if I'd want to get lunch, just the 2 of us. He says he's been thinking. And then he says a thing that lands differently than anything has landed in a long while. He says, I feel like I don't really know you, Dad. Is that a weird thing to say? I sit very still. Because it is not a weird thing to say. It is the truest thing he's said to me in years, and it has arrived, by my own exact reckoning, about 5 months too late to change a single line in Ed Brunner's file. We went to a diner that Saturday. He ordered the pancakes. I ordered eggs. We talked 2 hours in a way we never had, not about money, not about the truck, not about who owes who. He asked me what I actually did all those years, what I actually fixed, and I told him about the courthouse tower and the year I spent on it, and he listened and he laughed in the right spots, and near the end he set down his fork and said, "I'm sorry I didn't come, Dad, to the hospital. I've been trying to figure out how to say it for months." I looked at my boy across that sticky diner table, his pancakes going cold, and I felt the whole complicated weight of being somebody's father. The love that doesn't ask to be deserved, the wound that doesn't need a scene, the forgiveness that is not the same thing as forgetting. "I know," I said. I didn't say it's all right, because it wasn't. I didn't say don't worry about it, because he should, a little. I didn't say the will is signed and none of you are in it. I said, "I know," and I meant it, and I picked up my coffee, and we kept talking. It's a Saturday morning now, real spring at last, and I'm out back on Linden Street winding the grandfather clock my father carried home the year I was born. You wind it once a week. You give the weights their height, and you set the pendulum swinging, and then you step back and let it run, and it keeps honest time long after the hand that wounded is gone. That's the whole secret of the trade, if there is one. The work that lasts is the work nobody sees you do. I'm 71. They opened my chest and fixed my heart. I came home alone. I changed my will. I've had pot roast with my children half a dozen times since, and they are, in the ways that remain to them, good company. They believe they're inheriting this house. What they're inheriting is Saturday mornings, if they want them, and cornbread, and the occasional call from a father who, in spite of all of it, stayed warm. That's what's on offer. That's what I've got left to give. The papers are in Ed Brunner's drawer. Lily's account is funded and waiting for a girl who mailed a stranger a heart with a Band-Aid on it. The red bud is blooming whether anyone noticed or not. And the old clock my father bought the year I came into this world is ticking away on the wall behind me, keeping its honest time, telling the truth to an empty room, the way it always has, the way it always will, long after I'm not here to wind it.